The Black Studies program at Cleveland State University welcomes you to this season of Images, a public affairs radio forum dedicated to open dialogue on a variety of diverse topics of interest and issues of concern, which focus on the life and experiences of African Americans and all peoples of African descent. By visiting our website at www.csuohio.edu/blackstudies or calling 216-687-3655, you can learn more about upcoming Black Studies program events and activities. Now, here is your host for Images.
And welcome to Images. I'm Prester Pickett, your host for this broadcast of Images. Our conversation today is about Project 400, our lived experience. Our special guests today include Dr. Ronnie Dunn, who is the Interim Chief Diversity Officer for Cleveland State University. We also have joining him Dr. Mittie Jones, Professor Emerita and Interim Director for the Diversity Institute. The opportunity to engage her with this conversation in a representation of the Office of Inclusion and Multicultural Engagement. Welcome to Images.
Thank you.
Thank you. If you would open with a discussion about your new roles, at least since the last time you've possibly appeared on Images. You've been regular guests before as scholars in the field of urban studies and representing other interests. However, now you have very special titles representing a very special and important office here at Cleveland State University.
Yes. Well, once again, I'd like to thank you, Prester, for this opportunity to discuss this most important event, Project 400. As you mentioned, my new role here at the university is Interim Chief Diversity Officer. I've been serving in this role since July of 2019. So, 2018. So just over a year I've been in this position. I've been on faculty at the Urban College. This would be my 15th year.
And for community members to understand, what does your office do in leading a major division here at the university?
Well, my office and the division is responsible for enhancing diversity and inclusion across the university. That includes recruitment, retention, and graduation for students, increasing faculty diversity as well as staff, and just addressing the needs of our very diverse campus. CSU is actually the most diverse four-year public university in the state of Ohio. So we're striving to create a more welcoming, inclusive campus community at all times. That is our ultimate goal.
And that's done with a Diversity Institute. Dr. Jones, can you explain the work that is done and the team that you've assembled for the discussions with the Diversity Institute here at the university?
Okay, thank you, Prester. Well, you mentioned that I am a faculty member emerita, which means that I retired. I actually retired in 2016 from Cleveland State after 31 years of employment here. In October of last year, though, I was asked to come back by Dr. Dunn to serve in an interim capacity as director of the Diversity Institute. It's a new entity, and our three functions are teaching and training, research, and outreach. And so with that, we are planning to do and have done some research related to the status of diversity internally at Cleveland State, looking at the outcomes of some of the programs that have been established at Cleveland State in terms of pursuing the diversity initiative at the university, and we hope to use that information to help with the implementation of the university's diversity action plan. With regard to teaching and training, it is our intent to provide more cultural competency in terms of, again, operations at the university as well as externally, and addressing some of the issues that we see that contribute to some of the divisiveness and disparity that we see internally at the university and elsewhere. And then as it relates to outreach, we will be working with and have worked with external entities to address some of these same issues and building partnerships which will help us to, again, pursue our goals and objectives. And the conference that we're going to be talking about today is a key example of the outreach work that we're doing and the collaboration that we're building with other entities for this initiative as well as others.
And clarifying with the emerita status, that isn't just retiring. A number of our faculty retire but don't acquire that very special honor in being recognized as Professor Emerita. So congratulations in that status, as well as the outstanding work that you're doing now with this new position. Also, the need for our audience to understand, Dr. Dunn, what is Project 400? We know it is a discussion of our lived experience. Mm-hmm. However, everyone isn't acquainted with the 400 and also the activities that you're leading us in for not only Cleveland State University, the entire greater Cleveland community. So please explain Project 400.
Yes, Project 400 is the observation of the 400-year anniversary of the first Africans that were brought to the U.S. in 1619, and that they were brought in as indentured servants. There's some historical debate as to what their actual status were, whether it was initially indentured servitude or as bonded slaves. But this marks the 400-year anniversary of that historic event. Mm-hmm. And we felt compelled to observe. It's not a celebratory type of occasion, but it is definitely something that is noteworthy and needs to be observed. And we need to not only reflect on that 400-year history and the challenges and struggles that people of African descent in this country have overcome, but also look at the obstacles and barriers that still exist that we still are challenged to overcome.
Dr. Jones, there is a director of administrative services for the Division of Diversity, Inclusion, and University Engagement, who's been very supportive in helping to develop the overflow of activities that are needed to make a conference happen. Mm-hmm. Can you explain what is going to occur with the conference and give a little introduction to that other colleague who has been at the table working with this development of activities?
Okay, well, Dr. Emily Lee is the person that you're speaking of, and she has been very instrumental in pulling together the various components of this conference. I have to credit Dr. Dunn with earlier this year having the idea and nurturing the concept of holding this conference, and given some of the attention that's being given throughout the country now to the issue of the beginning of slavery as we know it and the call for reparations and what have you. I'm glad that Cleveland State is in a position that we can say that we are moving forward on this. But getting back to Emily, she has been very committed to just putting together a conference, I think, of great magnitude in a fairly short period of time. And she's a fairly new employee at Cleveland State as well, and I think definitely an asset and a jewel for us to have as part of this effort.
And there are other faculty members, community members as well, who have assisted with developing the conference. We'll acknowledge all of the different type of partners that came to the table to make this happen. But Dr. Dunn, the vision then, a vision is followed up with a mission, and a mission is followed up then with provision to allow these things to happen. And to think that we have the Dr. Henry Louis Gates Jr. as the keynote speaker, followed by panels of other very distinguished scholars sharing their wisdom with the community, a free and open to the public event requiring registration in advance, but something that is engaging our community. How did this vision develop, and how did you advance a vision into actual fruition?
Well, Prester, if you recall, I actually had a conversation with yourself and Dr. Bynum. I think it was last year, not long after I came into this seat, recognizing that this 2019 was the 400-year anniversary of our ancestors being brought to these shores. So I wasn't aware of anything locally or in the region being planned, and I felt that something of this magnitude had to be observed. So some time passed, and there was no movement. So I took the initiative to put out a call, in essence, and reach out to some colleagues across the university, and we formed a planning committee, yourself being part of that, as well as Dr. Jones and Dr. Seck from Social Work, Dean Anglin from the College of Urban Affairs, Dr. Bynum in Black Studies, and I think
Dr. Adrian Gosselin in the English department.
Yes, others joined after they learned of it. And we also reached out to Case Western Reserve, Dr. Marilyn Mobley, the now retired CDO, but emeritus professor of English there at Case, and Janice Eatman Williams with their Social Justice Institute were also part of that planning committee. So, and Dr. Emily Lee, who you mentioned from my office. So we started convening, I think it was early last fall. We started actually meeting and planning, and needless to say, we had a short timeline, and we were fortuitous in being able to secure Dr. Gates as our keynote speaker, in that Dr. Marilyn Mobley, as well as Steve Mentor, executive in residence at the College of Urban Affairs, they have personal relationships with Dr. Gates, and we do know that Dr. Gates is in Cleveland annually for the Anisfield Wolf Book Awards, which is held the third Thursday, I believe it is, in each September. So that fell in line with our planning for this conference, and through Karen Long, who is the director, if you will, of the Anisfield Wolf Cleveland Book Week, through both herself and Dr. Mobley, we were able to reach out to Dr. Gates, and he so graciously accepted our invitation to be our keynote speaker on the Friday morning to open our conference for the plenary.
A very thorough description of the assembly, and then also to think that after we open with that keynote address, there are other discussions with major scholars who have decided to stay with us, to say that the continuation of a discussion will occur also later that afternoon, and then into the next day, Saturday. Yes. The opening panel discussion is about the contemporary manifestations of racism. What do you anticipate being some of the ideas that will be discussed during that panel discussion?
Well, one of the ideas that has come forth in actually establishing that session was that of the post-slave syndrome, the effects of slavery on our community, psychologically, as well as in other ways, economically, educationally. So, just having been through that experience of 400, slavery as an institution from 1619 to 1865, was basically legal. And so, sometimes you think about the implications of that, it can be pretty daunting. But so looking at that, and we will have folks we have 4 tracks in this conference. economics, education, criminal justice, and I always forget one, health. So when you look at each one of those, you can see the evidence of disparities that exist in terms of health status, in terms of educational attainment, in terms of economic well-being and asset capacity, asset building, business ownership, etc. And it's even coming up now in terms of some of the campaign dialogue within the Democratic Party with regard to the legacy of the slavery experience and the subsequent impact of Jim Crow and discrimination, et cetera, et cetera. So that panel just kind of sets the stage for the 4 tracks that we're looking at, and so those are some of the ideas that I would expect that would come out at that time.
And the fact that that 4-track includes health, there is the significant contributions from Dr. Gregory Hall, who is also part of the committee and addressing health issues and allowing us to connect with the discussion about health issues around the city, but the excitement that the scholars at Cleveland State are announcing other colleagues from Oberlin, that there are other colleagues from Akron, University of Akron, and then this larger understanding that this is something that is a national discussion, and our students here at Cleveland State most definitely want to be participants at this conference, and then the continued activities that will occur afterwards. Can you talk about the interest in reaching even high school students, Dr. Dunn, in that we have 2 high schools here at Cleveland State University, MC Squared STEM School and Campus International, which also has an elementary school here on campus. But there are other schools in the community, there are other educators who want to help a young generation understand these things so that they can then join us as students at Cleveland State and know the challenges that we face as a people and as a community. So what is being done in terms of attention to the younger generation, as well as this idea of how this conference will educate our students here at Cleveland State and guest students from other colleges and universities?
Yes. Well, first of all, Project 400 is designed to be a year-long, community-wide observation. It's been adopted at the university level as a university-wide initiative. So the provost, it was actually Provost Jinping Zhu's suggestion when I first presented the idea, if you will, of hosting or doing something around this 400-year observation. It was actually his recommendation that we make it a campus-wide initiative. So it has the full support of the provost and the president, and it's intended to engage the broader campus community. Faculty have been engaged and instructed to incorporate it into their curriculum. As you mentioned, we happen to have 2 Cleveland Metropolitan School District schools on campus, public schools on our campus, and they will be engaged in this conference and the ongoing activities as well as the Cleveland Public Schools in general. Dr. Lee met last week with representatives from the Cleveland Metropolitan School District. So we definitely want to engage our younger community members, the students throughout not only Northeast Ohio, but this is a national observation, if you will, as well, in that the New York Times, they have an initiative which they've entitled Project 1619. And so it's a broad-based initiative, and we've partnered with other organizations. Once we started meeting and planning here at CSU, we then learned of another group that was meeting in the community and had similar planned a two-day conference as well. Those organizations were the YWCA and First Year Cleveland. First Year Cleveland, which focuses specifically on infant and maternal health for the first year of life and maternal loss of life. So we began to meet and collaborate and try to align our activities, and they will have a two-day conference in early November as well. So once again, as you mentioned, there will be a calendar of events throughout the year, incorporating not only activities on campus but in the broader community as well. And here internally on campus, this event, this observation is meant to be not just historic in nature, but catalytic and being the impetus to begin to address those structural and institutional racism that are endemic in the various sectors of our society, which these four tracks align with, that being in education, criminal justice, health care, and economics, as well as other sectors of public life.
And it's cathartic, a lot of the need to have some public discussions, and to think that this public discussion, our freedom of speech, our intellectual capital, if you will, our social interests are going to be represented at this conference. And it intersects with a few other anniversary events. Again, we're careful in not announcing this as a celebration, and that was something in the early discussions that you brought to the table as well, that we're not celebrating 400 years arriving on the White Lion, where there were, to my understanding, and the need to have these historians present to even correct us in the understanding of what occurred, but that these individuals were bound for slavery in Brazil, and then there was another slave ship that captured them and then ended up in Jamestown. Those individuals then again were received in a community that did not have the slavery in America that we know as it being a starting colony. And then that 2 years afterwards, we have other African descendants arriving who were clearly and documented as indentured servants. So thus there is this debate, if you will, were these individuals enslaved? Even that language, I think, Dr. Dunn, referring to individuals as being enslaved versus saying that they were slaves, is part of the discourse that will occur. The opportunity for other events to occur in the community, Dr. Jones, the opportunity for faculty to employ this in their curriculum. How would you, if you were still teaching the courses that you've enlightened our community with, how would you embrace this discussion of Project 400 into the curriculum that an urban studies scholar would be able to consider?
Okay. Well, one thing I would like to add with regard to access to information, we have been working with the Cleveland Public Library. They have been involved with us as partners in this project, as well as our own library at Cleveland State. So in terms of the community being able to access material, the library is making research lists and book lists available that people will be able to tap into to find out more information, get the history of what has happened with regard to this topic. So that would happen. Now, with regard to teaching, I actually will be teaching an urban policy class.
Thank you.
Online. I mean, I actually am. It started on Monday. And it's an urban policy class. And from the standpoint of policy, I think it's helpful to have a background and understanding of how policy is developed and created. So as you are probably aware, through Case Western Reserve, we received some displays. I think there are like 5 placards,
Panels,
panels that show the progression of what happened since 1619 going forward. And I found it very enlightening to see some of the laws that were actually passed early on in New Jersey and New York that legalized slavery. And so when we have a conversation at this point about what the role of the United States government might be, or any government might be, in addressing or eradicating the effects of slavery, I think it's helpful to understand that this was codified, that it wasn't just practice. It wasn't just something that people did. It was lawful at that time. And so that probably makes it even more difficult to overcome and address some of those issues. So that's one thing, kind of understanding the history of legislation. And one of the controversial things that's come out of that 1619 project, which is something that Dr. Dunn mentioned, the New York Times published, was the idea that someone has put forth that the beginning of the United States was 1619, not 1776. And if you think about that in terms of how that has established even up to this day the way that people relate to issues related to race relations, and that ongoing controversy and just, I guess, unwillingness to acknowledge and accept the implications is just very troubling. I just think about just recently some of the conversation around what's happening with regard to the effort to have a recognition of what happened to Emmett Till and how people are going and destroying the things that are put up to give some recognition to his life and loss of his life and the actions that led to it. So it's ongoing. So that's one piece. And then also, the difficulty of getting legislation passed. That's one thing in urban policy. We talk about the way that policy is introduced, how it's discussed, how it's passed or not passed. And for me as a political scientist, I was very involved with an organization called the National Conference of Black Political Scientists some years ago. And through that organization, I first found out about a group called NCOBRA, which is the acronym for National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, that was established in 1917. And one of the things that they promoted was legislation, reparations legislation, that was introduced by John Conyers, who was a congressman from Detroit, which is where I'm from. But anyway, that legislation was introduced in 1993. It never passed. Every year that Conyers was a congressman, he introduced that legislation, and unfortunately, his tenure in Congress ended in somewhat of a disgraceful mode, I must say. But nonetheless, that legislation has been reintroduced this year, still H.R. 40.
So we clearly hear that this is an academic exercise. Even as early as today, Dr. Dunn, I've inherited your course that you established through Urban Affairs, the African American experience, the African American images in film. And we have joining us Dr. Adrienne Gosselin on a panel talking about the literary arts and how they advanced into film. Joining her is also instructor Eric Seiler of our film school and media sciences that are studied here at the university. Kevin Hurd, a Call-in Post representative who is a journalist, who works for the Call-in Post. And Nikki Bird, she is a film maker because she studied film here at Cleveland State University, and she also happens to be the president of the Alumni Association. So again, you've already inspired at this table the discussion of faculty taking the concept of Project 400. We thank you, applaud you, and definitely look forward to supporting you and your office and all of the efforts that are coming through your division. We also thank our listening audience for tuning in for this conversation about Project 400, Our Lived Experience, which I'm certain will be our lived experiences as well, in looking at how diverse our conversation about this topic will be, can be, and will hopefully continue to be. We thank you for tuning in to Images.
You have been listening to Images, a public affairs radio program produced by the Cleveland State University Black Studies Program and this station. The opinions expressed were those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Cleveland State University, the Black Studies Program, or the station. We hope you have enjoyed the music performed by the Jazz Heritage Orchestra. If you are interested in finding out more about the Black Studies Program, call 216-687-3655 or visit our website at www.csuohio.edu/blackstudies.